made a very strong pitch for the relationship and its importance going into the decades ahead. But many in New Delhi, certainly, and in the commentariat, believe that we have lost the mojo. The bilateral relationship is struggling to grapple with issues around trade, Iran, perhaps some key questions around visa and Indian economic realities, and of course expectations from the US. And all of this together is actually challenging the momentum that we had gathered over the last 5 to 7 years. So how would you respond to that evaluation that we are actually struggling in our bilateral today?
Well, I hope that Indians don't feel that way, because Americans don't feel that way. The way this administration and the United States feels is that this relationship is stronger now and that the opportunities are greater now than they've ever been. And we look at that with our partnership in Afghanistan. We look at that in the way that I would not be here if it was not important. We look at that, the fact that we're about to have the 2+2 dialogue that's going to happen, where we actually talk about combining our military, our defense, and other issues. The fact that we're talking about trade is a good thing. That means there's a lot of trade happening between the two countries, and we want more of that trade and investment between the two countries. So when you have this many discussions, it means you have a lot in common. It means you're doing more business together. It means you're communicating more. And it means that you are going through the growing pains of doing that. But the United States very much, and the Trump administration specifically, puts a lot of value on the U.S.-India partnership, not because of where we've been, but because of where we're going. And we know that through the issues and the challenges we face in the future and the opportunities and successes that are available to us, we want to partner with India, and our hope is that India wants to partner with the United States.
Madam Ambassador, you mentioned Afghanistan. Let's move to the neighbor of Afghanistan, Iran. And there, you can clearly see there is a different assessment of how we should engage with Iran, both in New Delhi and DC. And of course, I think the US is cognizant of India's concerns and why India places a premium on that relationship with Iran. But this seems to be clearly an area where the US has pitched a strong line, and the Indians, over the past few decades, have maintained an independent relationship. How do you see a reconciliation of these two different approaches? And now you throw EU into the mix, and how does that pan out for Iran? Again, an area which you have personally worked on during your time here at the UN.
So we strongly believe that Iran is a threat. We strongly believe that we can't take our eyes off of Iran. And we don't believe this because of some ideas. We believe this because of proof. We've seen the fact that in spite of the Iran deal, where I realize many countries invested time in it, Iran still, with all of those incentives, have continued to violate resolution after resolution. They violated the building of ballistic missiles. They violated by supporting terrorism. They violated by the fact that they're continuing to sell arms and give arms to the Houthis when we look at what's going on in Yemen. So all that the United States did and what President Trump did was, just because countries came together on a deal doesn't mean we should be blind to these violations. It means we should be more cautious about these violations. We should be more astute when we're looking at these violations, because every one of these violations is a threat to all of us. And what President Trump has said is we need to hold Iran to account. If you look at all of the conflicts in the region, the one thing they have in common is Iran. And the United States wants to be cautious, but wants the international community to make sure they're paying attention to the violations and the bad nature that we're seeing Iran go down. And what we're going to continue to do is keep the pressure on them, and we hope that other countries will join us, because in our eyes, Iran is the next North Korea.
And are you having these conversations with, say, your partners in EU and India on trying to find common space to move forward in this?
So we did talk about this. I did with Prime Minister Modi. We do have this in terms of our dialogue, because I think that India also recognizes the threats of Iran. We understand the logistics that come into play with Iran, But we have to always make sure that the priority is peace and security. And as long as the priority is peace and security, the U.S. is going to continue to try and work with our partners, our friends, and our allies to make sure that we are all pushing Iran to be a good, accountable international neighbor.
Let me move to another geography now. I mean, because of your particular job description, we only move to the interesting areas. So let's move to North Korea. I think that's again something that you personally invested in this new avatar of yours. And we've had the big event, we've had the summit. Is there a roadmap? Is there an end game? Or was this a media event, a social media event that excited all sides?
Well, what should excite all sides is that we haven't had any more ballistic missile testing. I mean, that is a huge success in itself. And I can tell you that the international community is to be commended for the situation that we are in with North Korea right now, because it was the international community that came together, that passed the sanctions 3 times in the Security Council. We cut off all of the exports, 90% of the trade, 30% of the oil. We stopped the labor pool that was bringing in revenue, and North Korea started to feel it. On top of that, the international partners also expelled diplomats. They stopped verbal communication with North Korea, and we completely isolated them for their behavior. In return, they wanted to come to the negotiating table. What we had hoped with the summit was that after the summit was over, that both leaders would still have the political will to continue talking. And that did happen. Now you're going to start to see meetings take place to see if that political will turns into genuine success in terms of making sure that North Korea does denuclearize. That's the end goal. That's the common goal that I think not just the United States, I think the international community wants. And I think North Korea is intrigued by the possibility of coming back into the international community and being a good neighbor.
And ma'am, there is some criticism that we have relaxed or eased the pressure from North Korea post the summit. Is that true?
Not at all. At the United Nations, we haven't even so much as done any sort of press statement, any sort of congratulations. We have not acknowledged the summit because nothing has happened. To us, the sanctions will stay on. The pressure will continue on. We need to see full actions on denuclearization. Otherwise, the sanctions will remain where they are.
You are clearly passionate about human rights. You made your visits to the refugee camps, and you were engaged on this key question while you were the president of the council. Let me put 2 poses to you on this particular aspect. The first, of course, is the US withdrawal from the Human Rights Commission. Is it disinterest in the issue, or is it a disinterest in the institution? That's the first part. The second, of course, is that based on the reportage we hear in New Delhi from, say, the Time magazine, Washington Post, New York Times, there is a general assessment that something is going on vis-a-vis the immigration issue in the United States, the parents and children being separated, and there is a impression that perhaps the US is not staying the course on key questions around rights and other liberties that you have defended in the past.
Human rights is a part of what the American people truly believe in. And human rights is something we've always fought for. With the Human Rights Council, I personally went to Geneva well over a year ago, and I spoke at the Human Rights Council saying that what was happening there was a farce, that you had a council that in name only was supposed to protect human rights, yet we were having protests in Venezuela and they wouldn't have a meeting. And the reason they wouldn't have a meeting is because Venezuela sat on the council, along with Cuba, along with recently the newest member, Democratic Republic of Congo. We've seen Saudi Arabia, China. All of these different countries get on the council to make sure they don't get called out for human rights. It's not true to its name, and the United States refuses to be a part of anything that's a farce. And so what you will see us do is continue to talk about human rights, but do it on our terms in what we believe is the right way to handle human rights. You look at the situation now in Nicaragua, it's the same thing. Nothing has happened at the Human Rights Council. The Iranian people are protesting, begging for the world to give them attention against their government, and the Human Rights Council has yet to address that. So we're going to address it, and we don't need a council to do that. And what I can tell you that's happening in New York, which is dangerous, the UN in New York refuses to talk about human rights, because they say we have a Human Rights Council. If the Human Rights Council doesn't do anything, why would the United States give them credibility? Because what that does is that now gives us the right to go forward and talk about human rights. But over this past year and a half, we went to all of the countries and asked them to help us reform the Human Rights Council. We had resolutions. We had over 100+ meetings. We had different types of conversations on what needed to happen. Every country was with us on reforming the Human Rights Council behind closed doors. No one was with us in public. Many of them said they just wanted to protect their pet projects, but none of them, not one of them, joined us and said, we will work with you on reforming the Human Rights Council. That was the last straw, and that's when we said, we'll be our own Human Rights Council, and we'll continue to bring up the issues that we think are important.
And on the immigration, the American immigration
On
debate.
immigration, I think what we're seeing around the world is major migration issues due to conflict, and we're seeing that everywhere. When I was in Jordan and Turkey, we were looking at what was happening in Syria and how Jordan and Turkey were feeling the pain of that. You see that in Europe. The United States is not exempt from that. We see the migration that's happening. The one thing about America, and what I have always loved, is America is a country of immigrants. It's the fabric of America to have multiple cultures, multiple populations, multiple heritages that do come into America that make it what it is. But we believe in the rule of law, and we believe in legal immigration. My parents came to America. They put in the time. They put in the price. They went there legally. We can't start to have illegal immigration come in at harsh levels, especially now during this time when terrorism is starting to be more, we're starting to see it more predominantly around. So all you're seeing the United States do at this point is find a way to make sure we know exactly who is coming into our country, and that we are properly able to secure the people in the United States by knowing who is coming into the country.
I know I was only supposed to pose 4 questions to you, but let me try and sneak in one more. When are we going to see a woman of Indian origin, Republican, run for high office?
So what I can tell you is a woman of Indian origin is trying to survive this job that she has now.